The rain was falling heavily on the streets of Chicago that cold November evening. The wind was blowing hard, and most people were rushing to get inside somewhere warm. But inside a small restaurant called Maria's Kitchen, everything was calm and peaceful. The smell of fresh bread and hot soup filled the air. The lights were dim and yellow, giving the place a cozy feeling that made everyone forget about the storm outside. Emily Sanders was working her usual evening shift. She was 26 years old, with long brown hair that she always tied back in a simple ponytail. Her eyes were tired but kind, and she moved quickly between the tables, carrying plates and taking orders. She had been working at Maria's Kitchen for almost 3 years now, ever since she dropped out of music school. Because she could no longer afford the fees, life had not been easy for Emily. Her father had passed away when she was just 15, leaving her mother to raise 3 children alone. Emily was the oldest, and she had taken on the responsibility of helping her family from a very young age. She worked part-time jobs throughout high school and managed to get a scholarship to study piano at a prestigious music college. For 2 years, she had lived her dream. She practiced for hours every day, and her teachers said she had a rare gift. But then her mother got sick, and the medical bills started piling up. Emily had no choice but to leave school and start working full-time to support her family. Now, 3 years later, she was still paying off those medical bills. Her mother had recovered, thankfully, but the debt remained like a heavy chain around Emily's neck. She worked double shifts whenever she could, and she had not touched a piano in over 2 years. It was too painful to play, knowing what she had given up. That evening, the restaurant was mostly empty because of the bad weather. Only a few regular customers sat at their usual tables, drinking coffee and eating pie. Emily was wiping down the counter when the front door opened, and a gust of cold wind rushed in along with a tall man in an expensive coat. The man was in his early 60s, with gray hair and a strong face. He walked with confidence, like someone who was used to being in charge. Behind him came 2 younger men in suits, who looked like bodyguards or assistants. Emily noticed immediately that this was not a regular customer. His clothes were too expensive, his watch probably cost more than she made in a year, and he had an air of power about him that was impossible to ignore. The man looked around the small restaurant with curious eyes. He seemed out of place here, like a king who had accidentally walked into a peasant's home. But instead of looking uncomfortable, he smiled warmly, as if he was genuinely happy to be in such a simple place. Emily walked over to greet them. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Maria's Kitchen. Table for 3? The man nodded. "Yes, please. Somewhere quiet, if possible?" Emily led them to a corner booth, the nicest table in the restaurant. She handed them menus and noticed that the 2 younger men immediately started looking around the room, checking every corner and every exit. "Definitely bodyguards," she thought. "Can I get you something to drink while you decide?" Emily asked politely. "Just water for now," the older man said. "And could you tell me about the specials tonight?" Emily went through the menu, explaining each dish with the enthusiasm she always showed to customers. The man listened carefully, asking questions about the ingredients and how things were prepared. He seemed genuinely interested, which surprised Emily. Most wealthy people who accidentally wandered into places like this just ordered quickly and left. But this man was taking his time, enjoying the experience. After they ordered, Emily went back to her other duties. But she could not help glancing at the corner booth from time to time. The man was eating slowly, savoring every bite of his simple meal of soup and bread. He was talking quietly with his companions, and occasionally he would look around the restaurant with that same curious smile. About an hour later, most of the other customers had left. The storm outside had gotten worse, and Maria, the owner, had decided to close early. She was in the back, preparing to shut down the kitchen, leaving Emily alone in the front to take care of the last few guests. It was then that Emily noticed something she had walked past 1,000 times without really seeing. In the corner of the restaurant, covered with a dusty cloth, sat an old piano. It had been there when Maria bought the place years ago, and no one had played it in decades. Maria had always meant to get rid of it, but somehow it had just stayed there, forgotten and ignored. The wealthy man had noticed the piano too. He stood up from his booth and walked over to it, pulling off the cloth with one smooth motion. Underneath was a beautiful old instrument, its wood scratched and worn but still elegant. He ran his fingers along the keys, pressing a few notes experimentally. "Does anyone play this?" he asked, turning to look at Emily. Emily felt her heart skip a beat. Something about the question made her feel strange, like a door that had been locked for years was suddenly creaking open. "No, sir." "Not anymore?" "It's been there for years, just collecting dust." The man nodded thoughtfully. "That's a shame. The piano should be played. Music is too precious to be forgotten." He pressed a few more keys, playing a simple melody that Emily recognized immediately. It was a piece by Chopin, one of the first songs she had ever learned. The notes were imperfect because the piano was out of tune, but the melody still stirred something deep inside her. "Do you play?" the man asked, looking at her with those sharp, knowing eyes. Emily hesitated. She could lie and say no. She could change the subject and ask if he wanted more water. She could walk away and pretend she had not heard the question. But something in his gaze held her there, demanding honesty. "I used to," she said quietly. "A long time ago." The man studied her for a moment, then stepped back from the piano and gestured toward the bench. "Would you play something for me?" "I would very much like to hear it." Emily's hands began to tremble. She had not played in over 2 years. She had avoided pianos like they were dangerous, because every time she saw one, she was reminded of everything she had lost. The scholarship, the dream, the life she was supposed to have. I don't think I can," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled gently. "I understand. But sometimes the things we are most afraid of are the things we need to do most. Music does not forget us, even when we try to forget it." Emily stood there, frozen between the past and the present. The piano waited silently, its keys gleaming in the dim light. Outside, the rain continued to fall, as if the whole world was waiting to see what she would do next. The morning of the concert, Emily woke up before dawn. She had barely slept, her mind racing with anticipation and anxiety. She lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. She thought about her father, who had passed away before seeing her talent fully bloom. She wondered if he was watching from somewhere, proud of the woman she had become. She thought about her mother, who had sacrificed so much and suffered through so many years of guilt. Tonight, Susan would be sitting in the front row, watching her daughter perform with one of the greatest orchestras in the world. She thought about Maria, who had given her a job when she needed it most and believed in her even when she had stopped believing in herself. Maria would be there too, wearing her best dress and crying happy tears. And she thought about Richard. Montgomery, the stranger who had walked into a small restaurant on a rainy night and changed her life forever. Richard had arranged for a special section of seats, reserved for people who had written to Emily after the television special, sharing their own stories of struggle and hope. He wanted them to see what was possible when someone believed in you. Emily finally got out of bed and began preparing for the day. She had a light breakfast, took a long shower, and spent extra time on her hair and makeup. The dress she would wear tonight was already hanging in her closet, a beautiful deep blue gown that Professor Vasquez had helped her pick out. It was elegant and sophisticated, the kind of dress that made Emily feel like she truly belonged on a concert stage. The hours passed slowly, each minute feeling like an eternity. Emily tried to practice, but her fingers felt stiff and unresponsive. She tried to relax, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. She tried to eat lunch, but her stomach was too knotted with nerves. Finally, it was time to go. A car arrived to take her to Symphony Center, the magnificent concert hall that had hosted some of the greatest musicians in history. As Emily walked through the backstage doors, she felt like she was stepping into another world. The concert hall was enormous, with row after row of red velvet seats stretching toward the distant balconies. The stage was set with the grand piano. At the center, surrounded by chairs and music stands for the orchestra, crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over everything. Emily found her dressing room and tried to calm her nerves. She did breathing exercises, visualization techniques, everything Professor Vasquez had taught her, but nothing seemed to work. Her hands were trembling, and her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. There was a knock at the door. Emily opened it to find Professor Vasquez standing there, looking calm and confident as always. "How are you feeling?" the professor asked. "Terrified," Emily admitted. "What if I forget the notes? What if my fingers don't work? What if I embarrass myself in front of all those people?" Professor Vasquez smiled gently. "Do you know why I agreed to take you on as a student? It wasn't because of your technique, although your technique is excellent. It wasn't because of your musical knowledge, although you are very knowledgeable. It was because of your heart. When you play, you don't just make sounds. You tell stories. You share emotions. You connect with people in a way that most musicians never learn to do. That is what makes you special, and that is what will carry you through tonight." Emily took a deep breath, feeling some of her anxiety melt away. "Thank you for everything. For believing in me." "I didn't believe in you," Professor Vasquez said. "I recognized you. There's a difference. Now go out there and show the world who you are." An hour later, Emily was standing in the wings of the stage, waiting for her cue. The orchestra was already seated, tuning their instruments, creating that familiar cacophony of sounds that precedes every classical concert. The audience was settling into their seats. A sea of faces stretching into the darkness. Emily could see her mother in the front row, holding hands with her brother and sister. Maria was right beside them, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Richard Montgomery sat in a private box, watching with that same intense, knowing expression he had worn the night they met. And scattered throughout the hall were the people who had written to Emily, strangers who had become connected to her through their shared experiences of struggle and hope. The conductor walked onto the stage, and the audience erupted in applause. He bowed gracefully, then turned to the wings and gestured for Emily to join him. This was it. The moment she had been preparing for her entire life. Emily walked onto the stage, her blue dress flowing behind her like water. The lights were blinding and the applause was deafening. She couldn't see individual faces, just a vast darkness filled with sound. It was overwhelming and exhilarating and absolutely terrifying. She reached the piano and turned to bow to the audience. The applause continued, washing over her like a wave. Then slowly it faded and the hall fell silent. Emily sat down at the piano. She placed her hands on the keys. And for a moment she simply breathed. Then she began to play. The opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto filled the hall, soft and mournful and achingly beautiful. Emily's fingers moved across the keys with a grace that seemed almost supernatural. She was no longer nervous. She was no longer afraid. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The orchestra joined in, surrounding her with layers of sound that lifted her music to new heights. Emily lost herself in the performance, just as she always did when she played. The audience, the lights, the pressure, all of it disappeared. There was only the music, speaking through her fingers, telling a story of loss and hope and redemption. The concerto lasted almost 40 minutes, moving through different movements, different emotions, different colors of sound. Emily navigated every passage with precision and passion, never losing focus, never wavering in her intensity. She played with her whole body, her whole heart, her whole soul. When the final notes faded into silence, there was a moment of absolute stillness. The audience sat frozen, as if under a spell. Emily's hands hovered above the keys, trembling slightly from the intensity of what she had just experienced. Then the applause began. It started slowly, a few scattered claps, and then it built and became a thunderous roar. People rose to their feet, cheering and shouting, tears streaming down their faces. The standing ovation seemed to go on forever, wave after wave of appreciation and admiration. Emily stood and bowed, overwhelmed by the response. She looked out at the audience and saw her mother weeping openly, her hand pressed over her heart. She saw Maria jumping up and down with joy. She saw Richard Montgomery nodding slowly, a proud smile on his face. And somewhere, in the midst of all that noise and chaos, Emily heard her father's voice as clear as if he were standing right beside her. "You did it, sweetheart. You did it." The concert was a triumph. The reviews that followed were rapturous, praising Emily's technical brilliance and emotional depth. Music critics called her a rising star, a once-in-a-generation talent. Concert invitations poured in from around the world. Record labels renewed their offers, this time with much more attractive terms. Emily's future, once so uncertain, now seemed limitless. But the most meaningful moment came after the concert, when Emily was backstage, still in her blue dress, surrounded by flowers and well-wishers. A young woman approached her, maybe 18 or 19 years old, with tears in her eyes. I watched. "The television special," the young woman said, her voice shaking, "and I was going to drop out of school. I was going to give up on my dream of becoming a nurse because I couldn't afford the tuition. But then I saw your story, and I realized that giving up is never the answer. I applied for financial aid, and I got a scholarship. I'm going to be a nurse because of you." Emily hugged the young woman, both of them crying. And in that moment she understood what Richard Montgomery had meant about paying kindness forward. It wasn't just about money or scholarships or opportunities. It was about inspiring people to believe in themselves, to fight for their dreams, to never give up. That was the real gift. And Emily vowed to spend the rest of her life sharing it with others. Emily looked at the old piano, and the piano seemed to look back at her. The keys were yellow with age, and some of them were chipped at the edges. But they still called to her, just as they had called to her when she was a little girl sitting on her father's lap. Learning her very first notes, she remembered how her father used to play every evening after dinner. He was not a professional musician, just a factory worker who loved music more than anything else in the world. He had saved for months to buy that old upright piano that still sat in her mother's living room, untouched and covered with family photographs now. He would play simple songs, church hymns mostly, and little Emily would sit beside him, watching his fingers dance across the keys like magic. "Music is a gift from God," he used to say. "And when you have a gift, you have to share it with the world." Now, standing in this small restaurant with a strange, wealthy man watching her, Emily felt her father's words echoing in her heart. She had not shared her gift in so long. She had locked it away, buried it under bills and responsibilities and the daily struggle of survival. But it was still there, waiting. Slowly, as if moving through a dream, Emily walked toward the piano. The man stepped aside to give her room, and his two companions watched silently from the booth. Maria had come out from the kitchen and was standing in the doorway. Curious about what was happening, Emily sat down on the bench. The wood was cold, and it creaked under her weight. She placed her fingers on the keys, feeling the familiar smoothness of the ivory. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her hands were shaking. She was terrified, but then she took a deep breath and closed her eyes. And she began to play. The first notes were hesitant, uncertain. The piano was badly out of tune, and her fingers felt stiff from years of not practicing. But as she continued, something magical started to happen. The music began to flow through her, not from her mind, but from somewhere deeper, somewhere that had never forgotten how to play. She played a piece by Beethoven, the Moonlight Sonata. It had always been her favorite, the song she played when she was sad or lost or confused. The melody was slow and haunting, filled with longing and grief and a strange kind of beauty that made people want to cry. The restaurant fell completely silent. Maria stood frozen in the doorway, her mouth open in surprise. The two bodyguards had stopped scanning the room and were staring at Emily with wide eyes. Even the storm outside seemed to quiet down, as if the whole world was listening. The wealthy man stood absolutely still, watching Emily with an expression that was impossible to read. His eyes were bright, and something in his face had changed. He was no longer just curious. He was moved. Emily played for almost 10 minutes, losing herself completely in the music. She forgot about the restaurant, forgot about her debts, forgot about all the years of struggle and sacrifice. For those 10 minutes, she was exactly who she was meant to be. A pianist. An artist. A vessel for something greater than herself. When the last note faded into silence, Emily opened her eyes. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. She had not felt this alive in years. The wealthy man began to clap. It was slow at first, just his hands coming together in a measured rhythm. Then Maria joined in, and then the bodyguards, and suddenly the small restaurant was filled with applause. "That was extraordinary," the man said, walking toward her. His voice was thick with emotion. "Truly extraordinary. Where did you learn to play like that?" Emily wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "I studied at the Chicago Conservatory for 2 years, before I had to drop out." "Drop out? Why would someone with your talent drop out?" Emily looked down at her hands, the same hands that had just created such beauty. "Life happened. My mother got sick. There were bills to pay. Music doesn't pay the bills when you're 23 and responsible for a whole family." The man was quiet for a moment, studying her with those intense eyes. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card, which he handed to her. Emily looked at the card. The name printed on it made her gasp. Richard Montgomery. She knew that name. Everyone in America knew that name. Richard Montgomery was one of the richest men in the country, a billionaire who had made his fortune in technology and real estate. He was famous for his business success, but also for his philanthropy. He donated millions of dollars every year to various causes, especially those related to education and the arts. You're Richard Montgomery," Emily stammered, suddenly feeling very self-conscious about her simple uniform and tired appearance. The man smiled. "Guilty as charged. And you are clearly someone who should not be serving soup in a restaurant, as wonderful as this soup may be." Emily did not know what to say. She stood there, holding his business card, feeling like she had stepped into some kind of fairy tale. "I want to help you," Richard said. "I don't know your full story, but I know talent when I see it. And what you just did on that broken old piano was nothing short of miraculous. The world needs to hear you play." Emily shook her head. "I appreciate that, sir, really I do. But I can't just leave my job. I have responsibilities. My family depends on me." "I understand," Richard said. "More than you know. But let me ask you something. If money was not an issue, what would you do with your life?" The question hit Emily like a punch to the stomach. She had stopped asking herself that question years ago because it hurt too much to think about. But now, with the music still echoing in her heart, the answer came easily. "I would play," she said. "Every single day. I would finish my education, become a concert pianist, and share my music with the world. Just like my father always dreamed I would." Richard nodded slowly. "Then that is exactly what you are going to do." Before Emily could respond, he turned to one of his companions. "James, I want you to call the office first thing tomorrow morning. We're going to set up a full scholarship for this young woman. Tuition, living expenses, everything. And I want you to find out how much debt her family is carrying and have it taken care of." Emily's legs felt weak. She grabbed the edge of the piano to steady herself. "Sir, I can't accept that. It's too much. You don't even know me." Richard looked at her with kind eyes. "I know enough. I know that you sacrificed your dreams to take care of your family. I know that, despite years of not playing, you just performed Beethoven like he wrote it especially for you. And I know that sometimes the universe puts people in our path for a reason. I walked into this restaurant tonight because my driver took a wrong turn trying to avoid the flooding. I wasn't supposed to be here. But here I am, and here you are. Maybe that means something." Emily felt fresh tears forming in her eyes. "Why would you do this for a complete stranger?" Richard was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, more personal. "Because 60 years ago I was you. I was a poor kid with a dream and no way to make it happen. And someone helped me. A stranger who saw something in me and decided to give me a chance. I've spent my whole life trying to pay that forward. Tonight, it's your turn." Emily could not hold back her tears anymore. They fell freely down her cheeks as she tried to find the right words. But there were no words for what she was feeling. It was too big, too overwhelming. Maria rushed over with a box of tissues and put her arm around Emily. "Oh, honey, don't cry. This is wonderful. This is a miracle. But Emily knew that miracles didn't come without strings. Life had taught her that. And as grateful as she was, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. The television production crew arrived on a crisp autumn morning. There were about 20 people in total, carrying cameras, lights, microphones, and all sorts of equipment that Emily had never seen before. They set up in multiple locations across the city, from Emily's small apartment to the Chicago Conservatory to, most importantly, Maria's kitchen. When Maria learned that her little restaurant was going to be featured on national television, she was so excited that she stayed up all night cleaning and decorating. She hung fresh curtains in the windows, polished every table until it gleamed, and even had the old piano professionally tuned for the first time in decades. The producer of the special was a woman named Jennifer Chun, a calm and professional person who explained everything to Emily in clear, simple terms. The program would tell Emily's story from the beginning, showing how she had sacrificed her dreams to support her family, and how a chance encounter with Richard Montgomery had changed her life forever. "We want to capture the authentic emotion of your journey," Jennifer said. "So try not to think about the cameras. Just be yourself. Tell your story the way you would tell it to a friend." That was easier said than done. Emily had never been comfortable in the spotlight. As a pianist, she had always focused on the music, letting it speak for her. But now she was being asked to speak for herself, to share her most personal struggles with millions of strangers. The first day of filming focused on interviews. They sat Emily down in her apartment, surrounded by soft lights and microphones, and asked her to talk about her childhood. She spoke about her father, about how he had introduced her to music and how his death had shattered her world. She talked about her mother's illness and the impossible choice she had been forced to make. And she talked about the years of working at the restaurant, trying to survive while burying her deepest desires. It was emotionally exhausting. By the end of the day, Emily felt like she had run a marathon. But Jennifer assured her that she was doing wonderfully, that her honesty and vulnerability were exactly what the program needed. The second day of filming was at Maria's kitchen. The crew transformed the small restaurant into a makeshift television studio with cameras positioned at every angle. Regular customers were invited to come and participate, creating an atmosphere that felt both familiar and strange. Maria was in her element, bustling around the kitchen, making sure everyone was fed and comfortable. She kept looking at Emily with teary eyes, unable to believe that her little restaurant was going to be on television. The centerpiece of the filming was, of course, the piano. They had positioned it near the window, where the afternoon light could stream in and create a beautiful visual effect. Emily was asked to sit at the piano while Jennifer interviewed her about her relationship with music. "What does playing the piano mean to you?" Jennifer asked. Emily thought about the question for a long moment. "It's like breathing," she finally said. "When I play, everything else disappears. All the worry, all the stress, all the fear. It's just me and the music, having a conversation that doesn't need words. For so long, I couldn't play because it hurt too much to be reminded of what I had lost. But now, playing is how I heal. It's how I find my way back to myself." Then they asked her to play. Emily chose the same piece she had performed for Richard that rainy night, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. But this time the piano was perfectly tuned, and the sound that emerged was rich and full and heartbreakingly beautiful. As Emily played, the cameras captured everything: the movement of her fingers, the expression on her face, the way she closed her eyes and swayed gently with the music. Maria sat in a corner booth, wiping away tears. The crew members stopped what they were doing and simply listened. When the piece ended, there was a moment of profound silence. Then Jennifer spoke quietly to one of her assistants. "Did you get that?" The assistant nodded, looking slightly stunned. "Every second of it." On the third day they filmed Richard Montgomery. He arrived at Maria's kitchen in the same expensive coat he had worn that first night, looking distinguished and thoughtful. The cameras followed him as he walked through the restaurant, examining the piano, greeting Maria with a warm handshake. Then he sat down for his own interview. He talked about his childhood in poverty, about the anonymous benefactor who had paid for his education, about his belief in paying kindness forward. He spoke about the night he had walked into Maria's kitchen by accident and heard Emily play for the first time. "I have been to hundreds of concerts in my life," Richard said, looking directly at the camera. "I have heard the greatest pianists in the world perform on the finest stages. But I have never, in all my years, heard anything quite like what I heard that night. It wasn't just technical skill, though she has plenty of that. It was soul. Raw, unfiltered soul, pouring out through her fingertips. I knew immediately that I was witnessing something special." The interviewer asked him why he had decided to help Emily. A complete stranger, Richard smiled, and for a moment he looked almost vulnerable. "Because someone helped me once. Because I know what it's like to have a dream and no way to reach it. Because the world is full of talented people who never get a chance to shine, simply because they were born into the wrong circumstances. I have more money than I could ever spend in 100 lifetimes. What good is it if I don't use it to change lives? Emily is going to be a star. I'm just glad I got to be there at the beginning." The fourth day of filming was the most emotional. The crew went to visit Emily's mother, Susan, at her small house in the suburbs. Susan was nervous about being on camera, but she agreed to participate because she wanted the world to know about her daughter's sacrifice. Susan talked about the years when Emily had worked multiple jobs, sending money home every month to pay off the medical bills. She talked about the guilt she felt, knowing that her illness had cost her daughter her dream. And she talked about the joy she felt now, seeing Emily back at school, playing the piano again, living the life she was meant to live. "She never complained," Susan said, her voice breaking. "Not once. She just did what needed to be done. But I could see it in her eyes. I could see how much it hurt. And now, to see her so happy, to see her playing again, I can't describe what that means to me. It's like watching a flower bloom after a long, cold winter." Emily sat beside her mother during the interview, holding her hand. Both of them were crying freely, not trying to hide their emotions. The cameras captured every moment, every tear, every shared look of love and understanding. After the interviews, the crew filmed Emily playing the piano in her mother's living room, on the same old upright that her father had bought decades ago. It was out of tune and missing a few keys, but Emily played it with the same passion she brought to every performance. Susan sat in her favorite chair, eyes closed, listening to her daughter play the songs that her husband used to play so many years ago when the filming finally ended. Emily felt emotionally drained but also strangely at peace. She had told her story, shared her pain and her joy with complete strangers, and somehow it felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. Jennifer took Emily aside on the last day. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, she said. "And I have never seen anything quite like your story. It's going to touch people. It's going to change lives. I just wanted you to know that." Emily thanked her, feeling grateful and overwhelmed. She had no idea what would happen when the special aired. She had no idea how people would react to her story. But whatever happened, she knew that she had been honest. She had shared her true self with the world, and that was all she could do. The special was scheduled to air in 3 weeks. Until then, Emily would return to her studies, practicing for hours every day, preparing for the next chapter of her life. She did not know what that chapter would bring, but for the first time in years, she was not afraid to find out. The next few days passed in a blur for Emily. She went through her regular routine of working at the restaurant, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. She kept touching the business card in her pocket, wondering if what had happened that rainy night was real or just a beautiful dream. Her mother called her the morning after the encounter, crying with joy. Richard Montgomery's assistant had already contacted the family to discuss paying off their debts. They had to go through several verification processes and sign some paperwork, but within a week, every single medical bill was cleared. $27,000 of debt, wiped away like it had never existed. Emily's mother, Susan, was overwhelmed with gratitude and confusion. "I don't understand how this happened," she kept saying on the phone. "Rich people don't just help strangers like this." What does he want from you? Emily had asked herself the same question 100 times. But every time she spoke with Richard's assistant, a polite young man named James, there were no conditions attached. No expectations. No hidden agenda. Just a simple offer to help. 2 weeks after that fateful night, Emily received another phone call. This one was from the admissions office of the Chicago Conservatory. They informed her that an anonymous donor had not only paid for her to return to complete her degree, but had also arranged for a private studio space and access to the finest piano instructors in the city. The scholarship was comprehensive, covering everything from tuition to books to a modest living stipend. Emily sat in her tiny apartment, staring at her phone, unable to believe what she had just heard. The life she had given up, the dream she had buried, was suddenly being handed back to her on a silver platter. But there was a catch. Not from Richard, but from herself. How could she just leave Maria, who had been so kind to her for 3 years? How could she abandon her coworkers, who were like family? How could she walk away from the life she had built, even if it wasn't the life she wanted? Emily spent a sleepless night wrestling with these questions. By morning, she had made her decision. She would accept the scholarship, but she would do it the right way. She would give Maria proper notice, train someone to take her place, and make sure she wasn't leaving anyone in a difficult situation. When she told Maria the news, the old woman burst into tears and hugged her so tight that Emily could barely breathe. "I always knew you were special," Maria said. "From the first day you walked in here, I could see it in your eyes. You were meant for bigger things than this little restaurant. Go, follow your dream. And don't you dare look back." The 2 weeks of notice passed quickly. Emily trained her replacement, a young college student who needed the job just as badly as Emily had needed it 3 years ago. She said goodbye to her regular customers, many of whom had become friends. And on her last day, she played the old piano one more time, filling the restaurant with music that made everyone stop and listen. As she was walking out the door for the last time, Maria pressed something into her hand. It was an old photograph, yellowed with age, showing a young woman in an elegant dress sitting at a grand piano. "That's me," Maria said, her eyes misty with memories. 50 years ago, I was going to be a concert pianist too. But life had other plans. Don't let life have other plans for you. Emily, you hold on to your dream with both hands and never let go. Emily hugged Maria one last time, then stepped out into the cold Chicago morning to begin her new life. Returning to the conservatory was both wonderful and terrifying. Emily felt like a ghost walking through familiar halls, haunted by memories of the person she used to be. The other students were younger than her now, and they looked at her with curiosity and sometimes judgment. Who was this older woman returning to school? What had happened to her? Why had she disappeared? But Emily didn't care what they thought. She was too busy falling in love with music all over again. Her first lesson with her new instructor, Professor Helena Vasquez, was a revelation. Professor Vasquez was a legendary pianist who had performed in concert halls around the world. She was known for being demanding and difficult, but also for producing some of the finest musicians of her generation. "Play for me," Professor Vasquez said without any introduction. "Anything you want." Emily sat at the grand piano in the professor's studio. The instrument was magnificent, perfectly tuned, with keys that responded to the slightest touch. It was so different from the broken old piano at Maria's kitchen. For a moment she was intimidated, but then she closed her eyes and began to play. She chose Chopin's Ballade No. 1, a piece she had been working on before she dropped out. It was technically challenging and emotionally complex, requiring both precision and passion. When she finished, Professor Vasquez sat in silence for a long moment. Then she spoke. "You have extraordinary raw talent, perhaps the most natural ability I have seen in 20 years of teaching. But you are rusty, and you have developed some bad habits during your time away. We have a lot of work to do." Emily nodded, ready to work harder than she had ever worked before. "One more thing," the professor said. "I know your story. Mr. Montgomery told me everything. He is a good man, and he believes in you deeply. Do not waste this opportunity." People like him do not come along twice in a lifetime. The months that followed were the most challenging and rewarding of Emily's life. She practiced for 8 hours a day, sometimes more. Her fingers ached, her back hurt from sitting at the piano for so long, and there were nights when she collapsed into bed so exhausted that she fell asleep before her head hit the pillow, but she was happy. For the first time in years, she was truly happy. Richard Montgomery kept in touch through occasional emails. He never asked for anything, never expected updates or gratitude. He simply encouraged her to focus on her music and promised that he would be there if she ever needed anything. Emily sometimes wondered why a billionaire would take such a personal interest in a former waitress. But as time passed, she stopped questioning it. Some things in life were gifts, and gifts were meant to be accepted with grace. About 8 months into her studies, Emily received an unexpected message. It was from Richard's assistant, James, asking if she was free to meet with Mr. Montgomery the following week. There was something important he wanted to discuss with her in person. Emily agreed immediately, curious and a little nervous about what Richard could possibly want to talk about. She had not seen him since that night at Maria's kitchen. Their communication had been entirely through emails and phone calls. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at Richard's private office in downtown Chicago. When Emily arrived, she was escorted to a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Richard was waiting for her, looking exactly as she remembered him, though perhaps a little more tired around the eyes. "Emily," he said warmly, rising to greet her. "It's wonderful to see you. Please sit down." They exchanged pleasantries for a few minutes, with Richard asking about her studies and Emily sharing some of her experiences at the conservatory. But she could tell that he had something specific on his mind, something he was building up to. Finally, he got to the point. "Emily, I have a proposal for you. Something that could change your career and possibly your life. But before I explain, I need to ask you a question." Emily leaned forward, intrigued. "Of course, anything." Richard looked at her with those intense, knowing eyes. "How would you feel about being on television? About sharing your story with the entire world?" Emily's heart began to race. She had not expected this. Television? Her story? What was he talking about? Richard smiled at her confusion. "Let me explain. I am involved with a television program. A special that will air next month about people who have overcome adversity to achieve their dreams. It will be broadcast nationally, seen by millions of viewers, and I want you to be featured. I want the world to see what I saw that night in the restaurant. I want them to hear you play." Emily sat in stunned silence, trying to process what she had just heard. Television, millions of viewers. Her story, broadcast across the country. "I don't know what to say," she finally managed. "This is so unexpected." "I understand," Richard said. "Take some time to think about it. But I want you to know that I believe in you completely. You have a gift that the world needs to see. And your story, your struggle and sacrifice and ultimate triumph could inspire so many people who are going through similar challenges." Emily looked out the window at the city spread below her. Somewhere out there, another young woman was working a double shift, putting her dreams on hold, wondering if things would ever get better. Maybe her story could give that woman hope. "Yes," Emily said, turning back to Richard with determination in her eyes. "I'll do it." The night the special aired, Emily gathered with her mother, her 2 younger siblings, and Maria at her mother's house. They had set up the television in the living room, surrounded by plates of food and glasses of wine. The atmosphere was nervous and excited, like waiting for test results or news about a job application. When the program began, Emily felt her heart racing. She watched herself on screen, talking about her childhood, her father, her dreams. She looked different on television, more polished and professional than she felt in real life. But her words were the same. Honest and raw and real. Her mother started crying almost immediately and didn't stop for the entire hour. Maria kept squeezing Emily's hand, unable to look away from the screen. Her siblings, who had been too young during the hardest years to fully understand what Emily had sacrificed, watched with a new appreciation for their older sister. The most powerful moment came when they showed Emily playing the piano at Maria's kitchen. The cameras had captured the performance beautifully, with soft lighting and perfect sound quality. Emily watched herself close her eyes and lose herself in the music, and for a moment she forgot that she was the one on screen. She was just another viewer. Moved by the emotion of the performance, Richard Montgomery's interview was also deeply affecting. When he talked about believing in people and paying kindness forward, Emily saw her mother nodding along, fresh tears streaming down her face. And when he described hearing Emily play for the first time, calling it one of the most profound musical experiences of his life, Emily felt a strange mixture of pride and humility. The program ended with Emily giving a short concert at the conservatory, performing a piece by Liszt that she had been working on for months. The audience was made up of students, professors, and invited guests. The cameras panned across their faces as they listened, showing their expressions of wonder and admiration. And then the final shot was of Emily taking a bow, the applause washing over her like a wave. When the credits rolled, the living room was silent for a long moment. Then Maria stood up and began clapping, just as she had that first night at the restaurant. Soon everyone was on their feet, surrounding Emily with hugs and congratulations. But the real reaction came in the days that followed. The special had been watched by over 12 million people across the country. It trended on social media for 3 days straight. News outlets picked up the story, publishing articles about the generous billionaire and the talented waitress. Talk shows requested interviews. Podcasts reached out for guest appearances. Within a week, Emily had gone from an anonymous music student to a national sensation. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People from all walks of life wrote to Emily, sharing their own stories of struggle and sacrifice. Single mothers who had given up their dreams for their children. Young people who were working multiple jobs to pay for school. Older adults who had always regretted not pursuing their passions. They all saw themselves in Emily's story, and they drew hope and inspiration from her journey. The conservatory was flooded with inquiries. Everyone wanted to know more about Emily Sanders, the former waitress who played piano like an angel. Concert venues reached out, offering performance opportunities. Record labels expressed interest in signing her. Talent agents called daily, eager to represent her. Emily was overwhelmed. She had never sought fame or attention. All she had ever wanted was to play music and share her gift with the world. But now the world was paying attention, and she didn't know how to handle it. Richard Montgomery called her a few days after the special aired. His voice was warm and reassuring, like a kind uncle checking in on a favorite niece. "How are you holding up?" he asked. Emily laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "I'm not sure. Everything is moving so fast. I don't know what to do with all this attention." "That's natural," Richard said. "Fame is a strange beast. It can lift you up or tear you down depending on how you handle it. My advice is to stay focused on what matters. You are a musician. That's your identity. Everything else is just noise." Emily took his words to heart. She started declining most of the interview requests and media appearances. She turned down the record label offers, at least for now, preferring to finish her education before making any major career decisions. She focused on her studies, on her practice, on becoming the best pianist she could possibly be. But there was one opportunity she couldn't turn down. About a month after the special aired, Emily received a phone call from the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. They were planning a special concert to raise money for arts education in public schools, and they wanted Emily to be the featured performer. She would play a solo piece with full orchestral accompaniment. In front of an audience of over 2,000 people, Emily's hands were trembling as she hung up the phone. The Chicago Symphony Orchestra, one of the most prestigious musical institutions in the country. And they wanted her to perform with them. She called Professor Vasquez immediately. "They want me to play with the symphony," she said, still unable to believe it. "In front of thousands of people. I don't know if I can do it." Professor Vasquez was silent for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice calm and confident. "Of course you can do it. You were born to do it. This is exactly the kind of opportunity that proves everything we have been working for. You will walk onto that stage and you will show the world what you are capable of, and I will be there to help you every step of the way. The following weeks were the most intense of Emily's life. She practiced for 10 hours a day, sometimes more. Professor Vasquez worked with her on every note, every phrase, every tiny detail of the performance. They chose Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most challenging and beautiful pieces in the classical repertoire. It was a risk, but Emily was determined to prove that she belonged on that stage. As the date of the concert approached, Emily felt a strange mixture of terror and excitement. She had never performed with an orchestra before. She had never played in front of such a large audience. She had never had so much riding on a single performance, but she also knew that she was ready. All the years of practice, all the sacrifice and struggle had led to this moment. She had been given a second chance at her dream, and she was not going to waste it. The night before the concert, Emily went to Maria's kitchen. The restaurant was busy, filled with the warm chatter of satisfied customers. Maria greeted her with a huge hug and sat her down at the corner booth, bringing her a bowl of soup and a basket of bread. "Nervous about tomorrow?" Maria asked, sitting across from her. Emily nodded. "Terrified." Maria reached across the table and took her hand. "Do you remember what you told me on your last day working here? You said that music was like breathing for you. That when you played, everything else disappeared. Tomorrow, when you walk onto that stage, just remember to breathe. The music will take care of the rest." Emily squeezed Maria's hand, grateful for her friend's wisdom. Then she looked over at the old piano, sitting in its familiar corner, now polished and tuned and beautiful. "Can I play one more time?" she asked. "Before tomorrow. Just to remember where this all started." Maria smiled. "Honey, that piano belongs to you more than it ever belonged to me. Play as long as you want." Emily walked over to the piano and sat down on the bench. She placed her fingers on the keys, feeling the familiar smoothness of the ivory. And then she began to play, filling the restaurant with music that made everyone stop and listen. Outside, the city continued its busy rhythm. Cars honking, people rushing, life moving forward. But inside Maria's kitchen, time seemed to stand still, held in place by the magic of Emily's music. Tomorrow, she would play for thousands. Tonight, she played for herself. 5 years had passed since that rainy night at Maria's kitchen. Emily Sanders was now 31 years old, and her life was almost unrecognizable from what it had been before. She had graduated from the conservatory with highest honors, completed her advanced studies in Paris and Vienna, and had performed in some of the most prestigious concert halls in the world. From Tokyo to London, from Sydney to Rio de Janeiro, audiences had experienced the magic of her music. But despite all her success, Emily never forgot where she came from. She never forgot the years of struggle, the sacrifices, the dreams that had almost died. And she never forgot the kindness of a stranger who had believed in her when she had stopped believing in herself. On a sunny afternoon in June, Emily returned to Chicago for a very special event. The city had announced the opening of a new music academy, a state-of-the-art facility that would provide free music education to underprivileged children from across the region. The academy was called the Sanders Montgomery Institute, named after Emily and her benefactor, Richard Montgomery. The idea had been born 2 years earlier during one of Emily's visits with Richard. They had been talking about how many talented young people never got the opportunity to develop their gifts, simply because they were born into families that couldn't afford music lessons or instruments or education. Emily had mentioned her wish to someday do something about this problem, and Richard had immediately offered to fund the creation of a music academy. "But I have one condition," Richard had said. "It must bear your name as well as mine. You are the living proof that talent can flourish when given a chance. Your story will inspire the students who walk through those doors." Emily had agreed, though she still felt strange seeing her name on the building. She was just a former waitress who had gotten lucky. But Richard insisted that there was no such thing as luck, only opportunity meeting preparation. And Emily had been preparing for her opportunity her entire life. The opening ceremony was a grand affair. Hundreds of people had gathered outside the beautiful new building, including politicians, business leaders, artists, and celebrities. But the most important guests were the children who would be the Academy's first students, along with their families. They stood at the front of the crowd, eyes wide with excitement and anticipation. Emily walked to the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. She saw her mother in the front row, now healthy and happy, her face glowing with pride. She saw Maria, who had finally retired from the restaurant and sold it to a young couple who had promised to keep the piano. She saw Professor Vasquez, who had traveled from Europe especially for this occasion. And she saw Richard Montgomery, looking a bit older and frailer than before, but still with those sharp, knowing eyes. "Thank you all for being here today," Emily began, her voice clear and strong. "This academy represents a dream that started many years ago in a small restaurant on a rainy night. But really, it started even earlier than that. It started with my father, who taught me that music is a gift that should be shared with the world. It started with my mother, who sacrificed everything so that I could have opportunities she never had. It started with a kind restaurant owner who gave me a job when I was desperate and treated me like family." She paused, taking a deep breath. "And it started with a stranger who walked through the door one night and saw something in me that I had stopped seeing in myself. Richard Montgomery didn't just give me money or opportunities. He gave me faith. He reminded me that dreams are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible." Emily looked directly at Richard, who was smiling gently. "I can never repay what you have given me, but I can pay it forward. This academy will give children the chance to discover their own gifts, to develop their talents, to dream of futures that might otherwise seem unreachable. And maybe, one day, one of them will stand where I am standing now, ready to pay it forward again. That is how kindness works. It doesn't stop. It keeps going from one person to the next, from one generation to the next, forever." The crowd erupted in applause. Emily stepped back from the podium, and the official ribbon-cutting ceremony began. Richard joined her at the entrance to the building, and together they cut the red ribbon, officially opening the Sanders Montgomery Institute to the world. After the ceremony, there was a reception inside the academy. Emily gave tours to the children and their families, showing them the practice rooms, the performance hall, the recording studio. The children were mesmerized by all the instruments on display, touching the pianos and violins with reverent fingers. Emily remembered being that young, that excited about music, and she felt a deep satisfaction knowing that these children would have opportunities she could only have dreamed of at their age. Later that evening, after most of the guests had left, Emily found Richard sitting alone in the main hall. He was looking at the grand piano on the stage, a distant expression on his face. "Penny for your thoughts?" Emily asked, sitting down beside him. Richard smiled. "I was just remembering the first time I heard you play. In that little restaurant on that broken old piano. I knew immediately that you were special, but I didn't know then just how special you would turn out to be." Emily laughed softly. "I didn't know either. I was just a tired waitress who had given up on her dreams. If you hadn't walked through that door, someone else would have," Richard said firmly. "Your talent was too great to remain hidden forever. I was just fortunate enough to be the one who found you." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, looking at the beautiful hall around them. Then Richard spoke again, his voice more serious. "I'm getting old, Emily. I won't be around forever. But this academy, your career, the lives you will touch, that is my legacy. Not the buildings I built or the companies I created. The people I helped, that is what matters in the end." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. "You've helped so many people, Richard. You've changed so many lives. And now you will do the same," Richard said. "That's the whole point. The chain keeps going. Each generation helps the next. That's how we make the world a little bit better than we found it." Emily nodded, understanding fully what he meant. She stood up and walked to the piano on the stage. The instrument was magnificent, a concert grand that had been specially chosen for the academy. She sat down on the bench and placed her fingers on the keys. "Would you like to hear something?" she asked. Richard smiled. I would like nothing more. Emily began to play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the same piece she had performed that night at Maria's kitchen. The music filled the hall, echoing off the walls, reaching every corner of the beautiful building. It was a song about loss and longing, but also about hope and beauty. It was a song that had connected two strangers on a rainy night and set in motion a series of events that would touch countless lives as the final notes faded into silence. Emily looked out at the empty seats that would soon be filled with young students, eager to learn, ready to discover their own gifts. She thought about all the stories that would unfold within these walls, all the dreams that would be born and nurtured and eventually realized, and she thought about her father, who had started her on this journey so many years ago. She could almost hear his voice, speaking the words he had said so often when she was a child. Music is a gift from God, and when you have a gift, you have to share it with the world. Emily had shared her gift. And now, with this academy, she would help others share theirs. The chain of kindness that Richard had started would continue, passing from one generation to the next, creating ripples of hope and inspiration that would spread far beyond what any of them could imagine. Outside, the sun was setting over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was the end of a beautiful day, but Emily knew it was also a beginning for the children who would walk through these doors, a beginning for the families whose lives would be transformed, a beginning for a future filled with music and possibility. Emily stood up from the piano and walked over to Richard, helping him to his feet. Together they walked out of the hall and into the warm evening air. Behind them, the Sanders Montgomery Institute stood proud and beautiful, a monument to the power of kindness and the enduring magic of second chances. And somewhere, perhaps a tired waitress in a small restaurant was dreaming of something more, waiting for her own moment, her own chance, her own stranger to walk through the door and change her life forever. The story was over, but it was also just beginning.